Thank you so much for joining us at today's lunchtime lecture. Really looking forward to it. We're going to be looking at How to Make a Woodland by Dr. Robin Hayward, who's a forest ecologist and science communicator at the University of Leeds. They specialise in forest creation and restoration in the UK and the tropics, and are passionate about making science inviting and accessible to all. I'm really looking forward to this talk. Take it away, Robin.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in, wherever you're appearing from. As I've just been introduced, my name is Robin, and I am a tree scientist. And that just means I've got a really cool job. And the job kind of comes in two different streams. Stream number one is that I have to find out as much as I possibly can about trees and woodlands and things. And sometimes that's research, sometimes that is talking to other scientists and figuring out what they know too. Stream number two of my job is actually telling people about it, because science is all well and good, but if you can't get people to understand what it is that you've done, then it never really makes a difference. So thank you for being my excuse to do that today, to come along and tell people about some of the work that we've been doing in our team. So today's talk, how to make a woodland. And I am pretty much immediately going to caveat this talk with a bit of an edit to the title. The words themselves are going to stay exactly the same, but we're going to go from how to make a woodland to how to make a woodland, singular. Woodlands are super complex and diverse things. Depending on exactly what your priorities are personally or as an organization, what your contexts are, what your physical and financial abilities might be, you're going to have different goals in woodland creation. So I can't teach you in 30 minutes how to create a woodland generically. What I can do is I can show you the woodland that we've been creating and how we've worked through different stages and different choices to get us to where we have ended up. So the goal is, let's use this as a case study and think about questions you might ask along the way. So questions might be, do we want to do this thing? Do we want to do that thing? Do we want to do neither of those things at all, but maybe a secret third thing to achieve exactly what we want for our personal woodland goals? Maybe we don't want to do any of that, or maybe we want to do all of that. Let's do both the things. Let's do lots and lots of different stuff. Depending on what you're aiming for, you then need to decide, using the big mixing tap of woodland creation, well, what proportions are we using? What effort are we investing where? And what are we going to end up with? Woodland creation is ultimately a really complex but very rewarding task. And to understand our priorities of what we want to get out of things, the first really important question, I would say, is to think about, why are we doing any of this at all? Why are we investing all of these effort and making so many choices? What is our personal goal? And so for us, we're the University of Leeds working with the United Bank of Carbon. Our goal is really thinking about how can we help the planet, and also how can we do a bit of research and teaching and things to learn more about woodlands. And so the bit about what's helping the planet, there is a really obvious candidate for how we can help. You've probably seen this data before, whether it's in this graph or another similar one. You will probably be aware that we have a global climate crisis. Basically, the amount of energy in the Earth's climate system is more than it used to be and still trending upwards. This results in global warming, climate change, all the extreme weather events and things, and it tends to be driven by greenhouse gases, the emission of carbon dioxide and other similar gases into the atmosphere. And as a result of this, we have some plans on how to deal with that. The UK government, for example, has committed to net zero by 2050. That means for every bit of carbon that's released, we need to have at least that much being locked away again. And so a route towards doing that is woodland creation. You plant trees and they'll lock down some carbon. This is DEFRA's plan for England specifically, going from 14.5% of England with tree cover to 16.5% of England with tree cover by 2050. That feels like a small number because it's a 2% increase, but it is 2% of England. Like, this is a large number of trees, and it is a meaningful contribution to locking away some carbon. It's really good. It's not the only thing we can be doing. We do need to be looking into other ways of locking away carbon. We need to look into keeping the carbon that's already locked away down there. Like, we need to reduce our emissions. But this is a really important part of the plan. There is just one other thing that we might need to bear in mind when thinking about woodland creation, And that is sadly the timescales behind it. So I've taken away the y-axis of this graph, for example, just because it's for a single region, but it does show the overall trend quite nicely. So if we plant, as planned, trees up until 2050, this is the rate at which carbon is actually going to be locked down. And it starts really quite low. And that's because when we're planting trees, we tend to plant these tiny little sticks, these whips of seedlings. And so when we're planting those, even if they're growing really well, if they're doubling or tripling in height every year, that seems very impressive. But they're these tiny things. They're not actually locking away that much carbon in the volume that they're growing by. It's only once they're really established trees and they have this big height already and they're increasing that diameter that they start to really lock away carbon. So even with all the planting that we can possibly do, our biggest sequestration gains are going to be happening after that 2050 deadline. So it's really, really important we do this, but it's maybe not the only thing we should be doing. And it does kind of beg the question, well, what other things might we be wanting to target in the near term? We've got maybe like 20, 30 years until we're really hitting those big sequestration targets. What are we doing in the meantime? Well, luckily, we have another crisis. I probably shouldn't say lucky there. Coincidentally, we have another crisis. We have the biodiversity crisis, which maybe gets a little bit less press. You might not have heard of it quite so thoroughly. But functionally, we have less complexity and fewer species in ecosystems all around the world than we used to. That is largely because of processes of development, deforestation, degradation of environments, that kind of thing. And this is just a map of the world. The areas in the lighter spaces are near 100% intact biodiversity relative to their own kind of local baselines. And then the areas down towards the darker end, they tend to be around like 60%, maybe a bit higher, but not doing great on their biodiversity intactness, the level to which that complexity of living systems is retained. So this might sound just like a non-issue, but biodiversity has real value beyond just kind of how it feels to look and get those warm, fuzzy feelings of nice green spaces. It's really useful for regulating the weather, for preventing flooding a lot of the time, even for regulating what we might see as pest species that might carry diseases and stuff like that. Having a really stable and high quality biodiverse system can be really valuable. So we want to be protecting these things. We want to be maybe creating forests to support and restore some of this biodiversity. Now, I realize I kind of made this grayscale version from data from Newbold et al. From about a decade ago, and it's still pretty accurate, I think, but it's not the most showy. It might be a bit hard to read. So I've also recolored it to kind of show a bit more context for you. So we've got the okay regions, that's a little bit concerning regions, and the oh no, things are getting really quite bad here. And a lot of the oh no is related to agriculture, which obviously has huge other value outside of biodiversity. Agriculture can actually really benefit from biodiversity as well. So the question is, having created these current systems of how we get all of our food and all of our benefits, how do we reintegrate and restore biodiversity without losing those benefits that help society exist on other axes and aspects of development? So let's zoom into the area that we have a little bit more control over. This is the UK. It's got a lot of the and the oh no kind of areas. These are not technical scientific terms. These are just groupings that I've arbitrarily decided to help visualize things. But specifically where I am right now at the University of Leeds, we are right in the middle of the oh no kind of zone. Please don't take that clip out of context. The University of Leeds is doing great things. And actually loads of other people in this region are also doing great things to help with biodiversity. For one thing, we've planted a woodland. This is the field where it has been planted. This is the site of Gair Wood. It's right between two existing woodlands, Golden Acre Park and Eckert Wynn. And one of the benefits of this is that as we're going to try and get as much biodiversity back into the site as possible, we're actually connecting up existing woodlands and increasing that whole landscape level of biodiversity. So really important, really great potential for this site. What exactly are we going to do with it? This is where what I was beginning to say right at the start of this talk comes back into it. All of this is going to be choices. And so our first choice is, what kind of trees do we want to plant? Well, I think I might have mentioned briefly that maybe if you've got different priorities, if what you want to do is not create biodiversity or lock down carbon, if your main priority is to do something like create a forest for production of timber or paper resources, which is really important and is something that we currently import quite a lot of because we don't have sufficient production, you might want to create a production forest like is shown on the left. This is actually, I think, about 95% of all forests and woodlands in the UK currently. That looks a little bit like this thing on the left. It is not specifically geared towards biodiversity, but it can be managed to improve biodiversity as well. And there's actually a huge amount of expertise in this kind of area too. What you tend to see in them is these long, straight trees that have been planted to have that easy accessibility for harvesting and for milling into whatever wood products you need. They tend to be quite dark, not as biodiverse. They've got maybe more acidic soils sometimes because of the kind of trees planted there. They do tend to have good options for recreation and stuff. So you'll often see them as places where people go and have a walk, go and do biking, for example. But that isn't really our set of priorities. So we're going to discard a whole part of our flow chart of choices right there and then. Like that is a whole other type of woodland creation that has a lot of overlaps, but we're just not going to necessarily think about those choices again right now. We might have some things from there that can come in later down the line, but we're going to go down the set of choices that leads us towards a biodiverse broadleaf woodland, specifically for our priorities in woodland creation. So, okay, we're creating a broadleaf woodland. What does that look like? It looks like the ones on the right. You can see immediately just a slight difference. We've got more different types of species of trees. They're a little bit wigglier, they're funkier shapes. They have more gaps open for light. The goal isn't to fit as many trees in as possible or have them turning into timber. It is to have spaces for wildlife and natural functions to occur. And that means a lot of variation. So how do we create those? Well, knowing that we want to pick native or regionally appropriate broadleaf tree species, we still have a lot of choices to make about exactly which trees we want to go for. So this is an example. This is just an oak tree happy in a field in England. It seems to be flourishing. It is doing well. This is an example of the right tree in the right place. Perfect. Another example of the right tree in the right place might be taken from some of my PhD work in Malaysia. This is a dipterocarp tree in the Malaysian rainforest. Again, doing the right thing, perfect for its location. But if you swap these two trees around, well, the oak tree is not even going to come up to the bottom of this picture of the dipterocarp. It is immediately going to be shaded out by all the really tall tropical trees. It's going to get hot and humid and just, it's going to get a disease straight away because it's not designed for this environment. Likewise, if you take the dipterocarp and put it in a field in Yorkshire, it's going to get very cold, maybe not considering the last couple of weeks we've had where it's been very hot, but it's not going to survive the weather here. It's going to immediately blow over. It's not going to have things around it to support it in the kind of ecosystem that we've got here. So having the right tree for the right place is really, really important. And then because we're actually trying to create something that's quite diverse and might not always be the perfect woodland and the perfect thing all the time, well, maybe we want to put in some things which are good for where they are, but not perfect. Maybe they can adapt. So this is a picture of a holly tree. I would normally think of holly trees as things that I might want to put in slightly more shade. They might not fit into this bright sunshine out in the open kind of look that I got from Google Images here. It seems to be doing well though, right? It's got a lot of berries on it. It seems happy enough. And knowing the different tolerances of trees is equally important as knowing the perfect space for them, especially because we have a changing climate. Things are not always going to be as they are now as we're planting things. So we might want to look ahead to the future and see in models of the climate in 50 or 100 years' time, are the trees that we're planting now still going to be good? And how can all these different trees work with their various maximum and minimum tolerances to end up with a woodland that is going to last and survive and work in its huge, complex and interconnected ways? So we thought about all of this a lot. And again, this is only a short talk, so I don't have time to go into all the details. And I also don't have my notes for all of the details. But we ended up with a big list full of trees that we might potentially plant. I think this is the final list we went with, but don't hold me to it. I've not double checked that. So we planted a lot of stuff. It is mostly oak. It says alder at the top of the list because we also planted a lot of alder, but actually we also planted pedunculate oak and sessile oak separately. So those are two different parts of this chart and become oaks as the most thing overall. We planted a lot of stuff. All of these fill roles that are really good for biodiverse woodland. And so the question becomes, what do we do next? We've got so many choices still to make. We know our list of trees we're going to plant, but it's not just a case of throwing them in the ground and ending up with a biodiverse woodland, mission successful for our priorities. Our next questions are going to involve where we plant them. So we might want to look at the soils. We'll dig pits across our site and test the maps that we've already got and double check to see what soils we've got. If you've got a sufficiently large field, chances are you've got a few different types of soil. For us, this means either side of our site is a little bit wetter than the centre of the site. And so we plant more alder trees there because they like a little bit wetter soil. It's just tiny little tweaks like that. It's also worth us knowing where the water is running off to. We're actually on top of a hill at Gair Wood. So depending on where exactly the rain falls, it's either going to flow away from the city of Leeds or towards the city of Leeds. If it's going towards the city of Leeds, it's acting as a way to reduce potential flooding in extreme weather events. So it's useful to know what trees might react in different ways, give different services in this kind of thing. When we're actually planting these, we're finally at the point where we get to talk about planting the trees. It is very exciting, I know. I'm sure this is what you've been waiting for. How are we actually going to arrange them in the ground? It's not going to be exactly like this. This is A, not to scale. We planted about 66,000 trees, but B, not really the right shapes either. Planting in rows and columns can be really efficient, really effective. And it might be the right thing to do if, for example, you're wanting to harvest your trees for timber, very efficiently go down the line and pick fruits or something like that. But for biodiversity, we want these kind of natural shapes, a little bit more randomness and chaos. If you have these big open spaces, wind is going to flow through there. It's going to have really long sight lines for animals, which is going to mess up predator-prey relationships. There's going to be all sorts of extra chances for disturbance, and it's going to feel less natural. So we don't want to go with this. We want to go with something a little bit more random, these kind of dots everywhere kind of approach. Again, not to scale. There are so many more trees than this. It is unbelievable. So we've got our big field. Do we just fill it wall to wall? Again, that is another question. We could be doing that, I guess. But there are some things we've got to take into account at first. And for our purposes, we're not going to fill it wall to wall, for example. We're going to take away from power lines. We don't want to be interacting with the national grid at all. We don't want to plant a tree, but 20 years later hits a power line and knocks out power somewhere, or worse, well, not worse, differently bad, sets fire to our woodland. That's not something we want to do. So we're not going to plant near our power lines. We're not going to plant near our lovely dry stone walls on the site. They are a historic part of the Yorkshire landscape. We want to retain them. And they're also really good for insect biodiversity. They've got lots of little gaps in those dry stone walls where insects can live and have those tiny microclimates that are really, really important. So we're not going to plant there either. We're also not going to plant across pretty views. And this one sounds a little bit less compulsory, and it is. But we don't want to plant trees which are going to get in the way of things that our neighbours to the site really, really value. Or even just people walking along what are currently publicly accessible paths. What do they value when they look back towards this beautiful view of Leeds? We don't want to obscure that entirely by trees. We just want to frame it and keep the nice character of the site, as it always has been, but with a few more trees. So we're going to have these huge cutout sections, and it does start feeling like you're removing a lot of potential tree space, which, again, depending on your priorities, might be a bad thing. But for us, we're aiming for a biodiverse woodland. We want these open spaces. We've actually only planted about 2/3 of the site with trees. The rest is left open. And that creates more varied light environments, better spaces for wildlife to have, different niches building up, more insects, more pollinators, more birds potentially. These kind of shapes that we start thinking about are really, really important. So knowing where to put them becomes just part of the development process. Once we've decided our basic outlines of where we can and can't plant, we then want to draw some guidelines around it as well. And you'll notice we've, again, avoided doing any straight lines. We've kind of created these nice soft edges and wiggles for tree planting, areas of scrub, and areas of open ground. Within that, looking at our walls and where we kind of got those, luckily they're already east to west, but that's kind of what we'd be wanting anyway. Creating these big open east to west glades means that when the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, we're getting sunshine all day long. If our gap was north to south, we'd only really get good sunshine at the height of noon for maybe an hour or two in the middle of the day. And that would be a lot less good for pollinators and biodiversity. So knowing orientations like this with respect to the sun becomes really important. We've also left some space for ponds up at the top of the site. That is an ambition for the site that we're still working on, but adding some ponds, a bit of surface water, would be really useful. We have some ephemeral ponds that kind of appear as big puddles and support wildlife for some of the year, but having a permanent pond would not only increase biodiversity and wildlife, it would open up whole new areas for us to research as a university. So that's a really exciting thing for the future. And then public access to the site. We've come in as the University of Leeds, and while this is our lab, we have a lot of neighbours, and a lot of people value these kind of spaces. And so we want to open up more kind of woodland spaces to the public. Now, this says after establishment in parentheses, and that's for a really important reason about biosecurity. Essentially, at the moment, we've put a lot of baby trees out in the field. And if you have a field full of babies, they're not very good at looking after themselves yet. They need to establish. And trees get diseases. They get unwell. They get outcompeted by potentially invasive or really aggressive species coming in. So if you have people coming in with just seeds or tree disease on their clothing or on their boots, on their pets, you get some real issues around maybe that's going to affect that first establishment phase of the woodland growing. So public access, slowly going to increase more and more, and we're going to be bringing more and more people onto the site over the next few years. At the moment, we have lots of volunteers, which is really great fun, and they all go through a biosecurity process as they enter the site, just like all our researchers do. So there are ways to get people involved, and having this kind of public access and public integration is a really important part to me of woodland creation as a whole. So, as well as the public coming in, we also need to get in ourselves. That's management access. We need to be able to access every single tree, just in case it needs a little bit of TLC. So if we're helping it out, we need a little pathway to get in there with any extra kit and machinery we might need to help it. Finally, I think diverse forest structures, even within these spaces that we've kind of created and said, well, here's the open bit, here's the scrub, here's the proper planted areas. We're going to be mixing up the shapes of the trees within that. Are they going to be super tall? Are they going to have different amounts of understory in them? The more diversity, the more different physical and light environments we can have, the better it's going to be for wildlife. So we've got loads of choices to make around this. And this is kind of where we've ended up with ours. And if we take all of this, it just did a funky animation on my screen. I don't know how that made it through the internet, but hopefully you'll have seen this whole thing turn into, I think, one of our later drafts for our planning permission application and consultation around creating a woodland. We're changing a bit of land. We want to ask people if we're allowed to do it and how they might do it as well. So we took all of this information, our kind of best ideas of what we could do, and we took them along to other experts, but most importantly, neighbours to the site, the local community. And we also took this kind of physical cardboard, very tactile version of it as well, and got people to just mark on any concerns, any thoughts, any queries, and really went through it. And we learned a lot from this consultation. We did change a lot of our plans to kind of reflect what local people and other experts might want. So we went through this whole thing. We had this wonderful consultation. And eventually after that, the time came. We got to plant some trees. This was about, well, start of 2023. So we're on to our second growing season now, because this all happened in kind of January, February sort of time. It's best to plant trees when it's slightly cold, when they're quite dormant. So they wake up and they go, oh, we get a full growing season now. It's very exciting. You can see actually there's some frost in the ground in one of these pictures. The ground was quite cold and quite hard. So the fact that all of these people in the photos are volunteers makes it even more special that they wanted to come out and brave the cold to help us plant a woodland. We had about 300 volunteers from the local community and our university community in about even proportions who came out and helped with this. And it was brilliant. We planted 6,000 trees with volunteers and then got contractors to do another 60,000 and filled up this whole field with trees, planting loads of stuff. And now, into our second growing season, it's growing. The trees are slowly getting bigger. You can see them in their tubes here. You can see them kind of shining in silhouettes through the light that's coming through the tube. And to me, this is a really exciting picture. Now, there may be some of you in the audience who are thinking, that looks like a lot of plastic in that picture. And you'd be right. Plastic tubes are another one of those choices that is not right for every woodland. And is a choice you think long and hard about when you're making it, because it is one of the more polluting aspects of woodland creation, or it can be. This is the thing. As we start out, in the same way that those trees aren't sequestering much carbon, at the beginning, we might be creating issues as we go along. We need to make sure this woodland survives in order to make that worth it in the long run. So we have these plastic tubes. We decided that for this site specifically, they were necessary because we knew we had a lot of hares on the site, and hares love to nibble at the tasty growing shoots of trees. And that in itself might be okay. But we're aiming to jump straight to a really tall, beautiful, the woodland you picture when you picture a woodland with big, tall trees. And if you have lots of things nibbling the growing tips, what happens is that the trees learn, they adapt, and they turn into these kind of harsh, rugged, bushy trees, which are going to survive much better, but won't collect as much carbon. They're not going to grow as big. They're going to be quite low down, flat and specialized. And it's going to take generations before they become that tall forest as the older ones protect the younger ones. By adding in the tubes, we get to those bigger trees a little bit earlier. And the really, really important thing is we have made plans, we've committed. We are already taking away those smaller white tubes and reusing them or recycling them elsewhere. We're mixing in the bigger green tubes now because we've realized that while we didn't think we had as many deer on site as we now realize we do now need the bigger tubes to stop the deer eating them, the same problem. These will again be taken off and recycled and reused. And in a few years, there won't be any plastic left on the site at all. This is all something we are measuring and researching and thinking about very, very carefully. And if you are creating a woodland, my main advice here is really think about the choice. Do you need tubes? A lot of places won't use the tubes at all. A lot of places will use the tubes, and a lot of them will use a different version of the tube made out of different things. There is no perfect way to create a woodland. There are lots of choices. And as a university, our job really is to try and give as many people the information and the understanding of how to make those choices as possible. So this is one tricky choice we've made along the way, and something we're hopefully learning about more as we go along. Learning is the whole point of this. So as we look for the next 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, as this woodland starts to grow, and we start to get this beautiful whole woodland called Gair Wood, we're doing research. We are a university. I said we're not interested in any of kind of the timber economics or growing fruit or anything that can be exported as a physical product from the site, but we are interested in research and teaching and learning about woodlands and sharing that expertise. That's the value that we get out of this beyond just biodiversity and the carbon sequestration. So what research are we doing? Well, alongside all of those woodland design things I talked about earlier, we've got research considerations baked in everywhere. From the way that we've replicated different plots, so we can have multiple things measured in different places and vary things around the site, to this area of natural recruitment that we've left. Now, natural recruitment is a really cool style of woodland creation. It's the question of, well, what happens if we just leave it alone? And it's a really popular one with woodland creation generally at the moment. There are loads of benefits to it. And again, it is one of these questions that you might want to ask when creating a woodland. Is it going to be great if we just leave things to recover naturally? Now, you probably do if you've got hares and deer, for the same reasons as kind of why we've got the tubes elsewhere, put up this massive and quite expensive fence to surround this whole area. That's going to keep your deer and your hare out and allow anything that seeds in naturally to actually start to grow and to thrive. So on one side of the fence, we have our planting, and on the other, nothing planted at all. And because we're a university full of students, once a year, we get a load of students out with tape measures that run along on the inside and the outside of this fence, and we measure what's happening. Are we finding any new trees starting to grow? And how is the grass changing? The stuff that was already there at the beginning when this was just a field. How does that change when we planted stuff and when we left stuff alone? Does the stuff that plants itself naturally do better where we haven't planted anything else? So many questions, loads of stuff to find out. We are finding out huge amounts of data already, and it's really exciting. Looking forward to a lot of the analyses that are going to come out of this. And then, as well as this, we have experimental planting, which is probably our big experiment on site. And it sounds like maybe we should be a bit nervous about this because it sounds experimental. None of the actual tree species we're planting are experimental. They're all stuff we would expect to plant and expect to find in a really good woodland. The experimental bit is just how we're mixing up the proportions, how we are putting different things together, and in what densities we're planting them. So in a 10 by 10 meter area, we might have 1, 4, 8, or 12 different species, and we might plant either 24 or 48 individual trees in about 10 meter by 10 meter square. And then we do this in lots of different ways, and we measure how fast they're growing. how well they're surviving, the atmosphere and the soils around them, and the non-tree biodiversity. What is happening? How are these playing nicely together? How are they not getting along? What happens when you do different things in woodland creation? This isn't the perfect way to create a woodland. This is just information to get people thinking about it a little bit more. The way that we managed to get any of this to work at all, because it was a huge amount of effort, was through that volunteer planting that I showed you a bit earlier. There's 6,000 trees planted by volunteers. We know exactly where all of them are, and we know exactly which individuals are which species. It's really important that we can then track those over the next decades to see how they're growing and what they're doing. This would not have been possible because it would be a huge ask to ask of any external contractors to do as many trees as they planted while also noting everything down. So this is really a huge win for having a community invested in the science we're doing here. This is Emily Scott, one of our undergraduate project students who came to the site 1 year after planting and measured the amount of growth and survival going on. It's going pretty well. So again, research going on, seeing the outputs from these projects. But it isn't just about the trees themselves, it is about all sorts of things. And we have a lot of passive monitoring going on. We are studying things constantly, and technology plays a role in that. From soil cores that we are literally just digging out and keeping in cold storage so we can measure the biota, the microbes happening in the soil over time. We've got those. We've also got soil probes happening. So those are measuring constantly the temperature and the moisture just above the soil in the air at ground level and 20 centimeters down into the earth. And we've got Dr. Kat Scott, who is one of our lead scientists on the site. I think this is actually from the installation of our weather station. So that weather station is getting huge amounts of data, not only about how the weather locally might be affecting the trees as they're growing, but as they're growing, how the trees might start to affect the local weather that gets recorded here in the center of our site. So large amounts of data with very cool technology being created. Also, I recently discovered we get to shoot lasers on the site, which to me is one of those great high-tech, very exciting sciencey things, and is really cool. So this is one of the little boxes we're shooting lasers in. This is a gas flux chamber. And basically what you do is you pop it on a bit of your woodland and you see what gases are coming out or going in to the plants and the soil in that chamber. You shine a laser through it and you measure what the gases do to the light or what the light does to the gas. I can't quite remember which one, but you get to find out exactly what gases you've got in that little chamber. And that will change as the soils develop, as the plants develop, as the woodland as a whole develops. And this to me, probably just because it's got lasers, feels like some of the most cutting edge stuff we do. But in reality, so much of the stuff we are doing is cutting edge. It might seem like very muddy boots kind of science, but that doesn't mean there's any less groundbreaking and discovering new things and helping to guide some really cool woodland creation. No matter what your priorities are, hopefully we'll be creating things out of this that can help inform and guide people to find and create the woodlands that they want to be creating. The most cutting edge and important part of any of this, though, I really do have to say, is the people involved. This is the most words on any of my slides, more than all the other slides put together. And it's because we've had literally thousands of people working on making this woodland happen. And that is what you need to create a really successful woodland project. From our core team and the people who are actually designing it, to the hundreds of staff and our steering group at the University of Leeds, from the estates and sustainability services, to our students, the 30+ students who have been doing individual research projects there, helping us to guide and understand the way we're creating this woodland, the students coming along on modules who are doing field trips there to understand and help us measure things year on year. The 700+ volunteers and the 2,000 hours plus of work that they've already put into it, plus the monthly things going forward where they're still working on stuff. This is just a huge effort and it's really hard to overstate it. Beyond even our volunteers, we've had to have contractors as well who've done an amazing job listening to us, doing what we've asked and kind of thinking about all the different various things and the choices we've made about how we want to create our woodland. We're working with so many people. We've been supported by the Forestry Commission, Leeds City Council and DEFRA, and of course, the big project partners who made all this possible, the United Bank of Carbon and the White Rose Forest. It's a huge thing. So many people involved in woodland creation. and even down to everyone interested in woodland creation, however passively, however generically, you coming onto this call, being interested in this and supporting woodland creation to happen in some way, whether material or immaterial, is a huge part of how woodlands keep getting created. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. This has been my talk. Yeah, I hope I've helped you understand some ideas for questions you might ask around how to create a woodland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was absolutely fantastic. And you have lots and lots of questions from some people very excited about woodlands. Let's pop that just now. So a couple of people have asked about the different kind of cultures you have, and I think you kind of answered it throughout your talk. When you're talking about planting trees and different species, do you have mostly a focus on trees, or are you introducing other species of plants alongside?
Yes, so if I skip back through all of these slides, isn't always fun when we do this in talks. You get to see this all much faster and backwards. So this is a pie chart of, I think, the species list we've planted. There might be a few substitutions in there, a few things might have changed as the final options or in slightly different proportions. But you can kind of see towards the lower proportions especially, we get things that are not really truly trees in the strictest sense. So we are thinking more than just the trees themselves. Trees kind of become that big structure that we see overall, and then we're looking for things that fit in and support. And sometimes we might be thinking about whether those are shrubs, are going to be more of that ground cover, or we might be thinking about wildflowers and adding in more meadows, things that aren't going to arrive naturally on their own. And those kind of decisions about what we plant and what we encourage are kind of constant and case by case, and informed a little bit by the research we're doing as we go through. There's constant kind of course correction as well. So depending exactly what we want, we'll be planting different things. But for sure, it's not just the trees. There are a huge bunch of different priorities. And to get biodiversity, you need kind of every bit of the ecosystem to be working as well as possible.
Cool. We have another one here saying, what consideration do you give to tree infections and diseases and their spread? Do you consider susceptibility? Do you mix tree species to reduce or interrupt the spread of particular tree infections?
Yes, so we do think about this quite carefully. For example, you might notice in this tree species list, I don't think we've got any ash on the site. So things like ash where there is a known dieback disease, we didn't want to introduce at this point. So we do think about that kind of thing in advance. I think I mentioned briefly, but possibly not by name earlier, about biosecurity. So the idea of our phased public access, the fact that people aren't going to come in straight away and kind of bring those diseases onto site for these really young and still establishing trees. So part of that biosecurity is just telling people very politely to keep off for a little bit, and we'll welcome you in as soon as is reasonable for the trees and once they're established. But for when we're working there and when we have volunteers on site, we try and do as much as possible. We've got things like boot washing stations. So our very small team keep our wellies on site and they never leave. We just rock up in our trainers and then switch over when we arrive. But anyone bringing in footwear from somewhere else that might have walked through other paths, they'll be asked to just take a little bit of, I think it's a dilute alcohol solution, and just give their boots a bit of a scrub before walking off the hard standing and onto the more grassy, tree-covered area of the site. And that just kind of gets rid of any little seeds, any bits of dirt, any kind of microbes that might be clinging on and might affect the site. So it's never going to be perfect. Like, we do get things like deer prancing through our field quite lovely, and it's all very aesthetic, and they are, of course, bringing in things on their own as well. But just minimizing that spread as much as possible is really the best we can do, and keeping an eye out for it. That active management as things carry on going, the idea that once you've planted the woodland, that's not job done. We keep checking in, we keep doing little bits of management here and there. And yeah, one of our benefits of being a university doing this and wanting to do our research is we've got a really good excuse to keep checking in, keep looking back and changing our management as we go.
That's brilliant. A couple people here with several questions. One of them being, if actions are implemented in the kind of middle ground risk areas, is that considered better than focusing solely on the problematic areas?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
I think the question is, when you were showing us the uh-oh versus oh no slide,
Okay, yes.
how bad things are, I think the question is, is it worth focusing, like spreading attention across the and the oh no sections, or is it worth really focusing on the worst ones?
Well, it should be said that a lot of these areas of the oh no, like you can see London on there really clearly. Like, we're not going to plant a woodland over the entirety of London and restore its biodiversity to natural levels. A lot of these are just going to be big urban centres, and there is huge benefit to increasing biodiversity in those urban centres. Urban trees are actually a huge amount of carbon sequestration generally across regions, and they do a lot for biodiversity too, as well as for people. They can really, we've got researchers here at Leeds who are finding out just how much they can cool down cities by acting as just big straws to evaporate loads of water and keep the streets cool around them. So there's loads of really good reasons to focus in on those urban areas for biodiversity. But I would say, yeah, a lot of these areas are very low biodiversity for a reason. And if it's urban stuff because people are living there, maybe we want to do the best we can, but focus on the stuff that's really going to benefit those people as locally as possible. The areas which are more heavily agriculture, again, we don't want to be disrupting food systems. In fact, when you're planning permission for land use change to create a woodland, you have to prove that the area that you're taking out of crop planting rotation is not high quality food growing land. Like, we couldn't have planted this field full of trees on a field that was creating perfect crops. So again, we want to be retaining that level of agricultural output, but maybe thinking about how can we improve biodiversity around the margins, and what areas nearby, maybe there's soil types around just in that local area, which we can use to connect up areas of biodiversity. Connectivity is actually a really important part of this as well. So if you've got areas in your kind of region, again, not the most scientific terms, but you can make into really good areas of biodiversity, let's go straight for that. And then if we can just have corridors of connectivity running through those oh no zones, that kind of boosts the whole landscape and brings things up a little bit more. So it's working within constraints. We live in a real world. No one is going to say everything needs to be perfect and we need to prioritize the areas that are low in biodiversity for a very strong reason. But working case by case, seeing what we can do, thinking of big picture and how we can connect things. I think there's always little bits and pieces that we can work on.
Really good point. I've got a couple here about the kind of wrong trees in areas. If the wrong trees are thriving well in an area, does that would that suggest that actually they're the right kind of tree for that area? Or if not, could their presence be used as an indicator or like an early warning system for areas that need attention?
Yeah, absolutely. So this happens a lot, especially when you're planting a woodland. You might get an early successional tree, a tree that is like the first ones to appear, that grows so well, that can take over, but is like, hey, this field is exactly where I want to grow. And actually, that isn't what we're aiming for. We're kickstarting the process of woodland creation. The trees that we want to grow really well are the trees that will continue to grow well once we've got a woodland there, not those earliest species that like being in a big sunny field. So there's a slight difference there. And especially in these early stages, you might find that naturally seeding trees will come in with that kind of rampaging of these fast-growing species. And depending what they are, that might be really positive. That might provide cover for your slower-growing trees to come up through. Or they might need a little bit of management to cut back. So we do have tree weed species, things that we might consider as non-desirables to cover an entire field. I'm completely blanking on the name of the tree we've got on site at the moment, but we are kind of repeatedly bashing back. It's part of what our volunteers are doing to maintain the site and make sure our current trees grow really well. But yeah, there are trees we do want and trees we don't want. And it's just about knowing what that end priority is. As with all of this stuff, it is just making choices, knowing what you personally want from your woodland and making sure you give it a kind of as heavy a hand as is needed on that guidance, but also as light a hand as you possibly can. So naturally guiding things to end up with the woodlands you want.
That makes a lot of sense. On that note, someone's asked, they said they love to talk. How does rewilding compare or relate to a planned woodland?
Yeah, this is such a complex question because rewilding means so many different things to so many different people. It's almost as much of a complex talk as this talk could be if we really expanded it out. Rewilding can just be bringing things back towards this more wild, more biodiverse state. We sometimes think of it as being the reintroduction of big megafauna, so the big animals that really move through these spaces. The one that always gets lots of controversy is the reintroduction of wolves, for example. Like that kind of rewilding is big and kind of beyond the scope of what we might be doing in a small field near Leeds. So there are limits to what we can do. But trying to recreate some of these wild niches, I think, is very possible and relates really nicely. So kind of this idea of just focusing on the biodiversity, recreating some of these wild structures and patterns can be really, really beneficial. Comparing that to different styles of woodland creation, you might just do this at different scales. You might have a really intensely grown forest that is very geared towards one thing and do small bits of what could be considered rewilding in pocket ecosystems within it. Areas which are geared towards pollinators and are wild on a certain scale. Or if you have a massive landscape, maybe you want to rewild the whole thing. Yeah, it's hugely complex, lots of choices, lots of pros and cons across the board. And yeah, I think that is many talks all rolled into one to answer that reasonably.
It does seem like a very big question, that one.
Yeah.
We have loads and loads and loads here. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all of them, but are you happy to keep
absolutely.
Keep up the interrogation?
I'll take another sip of water.
Someone would like to ask, what could other areas learn from a community-led approach to woodland making? The recruitment area is on the edge. If it was on the centre of the site, what would be the difference in observations and results?
So community here, based on that last bit, I'm guessing is about the tree community rather than about people community. Because obviously we have people coming in, kind of a community of people working on the site. But if we're thinking about the tree community, self-recruiting and that idea of kind of natural regeneration, it is going to make a difference whether that is on the edge of the site or close to the middle. Partly because of how close it is to the trees that are going to be creating those seeds in the first place or spreading out or kind of clonally propagating bits and pieces through. So the closer you are to the trees, likely is you're going to get more seeds from them. That might be what you want, or it might not be. It depends what's in that patch of trees. If that patch of trees is just a single species, maybe it is a stand of 100% sycamores, for example, you get loads of sycamore seeds, they'll all start to grow, and what you'll get recruiting is just going to be sycamores. Maybe that's what you want. Who knows what your priorities are in your woodland creation? Probably not what we'd want. So you can do that. That's going to be very directly based on that seed source. The further away you get from a seed source, the more you might rely on things which aren't just the wind or kind of creeping in to start spreading those plants around. So you might be thinking more about birds dropping seeds in from above. And so that can be things from much further away. It might be a much more diverse type of seeds coming in. You might start to see more different species appearing. So if you put something in the center of the site, maybe you would expect to see more of that. One of the things we're actually really interested in is we've actually got quite different sites on either side. So the site next to our natural regeneration area is a site of special scientific interest and has a different set of species in to Golden Acre Park on the other side, which might have some really great trees, but also lots of ornamental species and things that might grow in. So kind of we might be able to work out where things have come from in the different seed sources. And I think looking forward into the future, seeing exactly what grows and where, and if things are making it across the full width of our site to appear, and what grows in the planted areas too, yeah, we might find some really interesting stuff about that kind of process of natural regeneration and trusting the tree community to do it itself.
It's really, really cool. There's been some similar ones about monitoring the kind of control area of the non-planted woodland and how long you reckon that might take to kind of catch up to the kind of intentional planting you've done. And yeah, whether or not you think it'll be more or less biodiverse than the one you've done on purpose.
So this is a really, really interesting question. And honestly, it's one of the things we are researching. There has been a lot of work done on this before. I'm just going to try and figure it out in my head. So full transparency, this is very similar to other work that I've done in the past in Malaysia. And we work on very different timescales in the tropics versus Yorkshire. So I don't want to give you the wrong numbers on timescales. But functionally, there is an expectation that within kind of a generation of trees, you might catch up to growth rates. And actually, if you have this natural process of one thing and then another and it growing in naturally, it should catch up eventually. And yeah, there might be a bit of a lag at the start, but in some areas, this is a really, really promising technique to use. In a lot of uplands, for example, you might be wanting to do this kind of natural regeneration protocol, where you just kind of remove grazers and you see what grows back. So this can work really well. It can be great generationally. It maybe doesn't get quite as much of a kickstart of physically putting the trees in there. In terms of the biodiversity, this is a really interesting question because it relies somewhat on what your neighbouring seed sources might be. So you might have a really biodiverse native woodland on your doorstep. Maybe you've got something like temperate rainforest just sitting there like the next field over. Incredible stuff. Go with natural regeneration. It's going to do really, really well. But you might have something that was planted to be a single species. And if that naturally spreads out into your field, you might end up with just 1 or 2 species total in that naturally regenerating area, which might be bad biodiversity. But biodiversity isn't just a case of species diversity. There's also genetic biodiversity. And that is another thing that really comes into play here. So one of the real perks of natural regeneration is that you're not getting something where you've bought a load of trees from somewhere that's grown them from seed or from splitting them apart and then planting them out. So if you get them from a place that's grown them to a plantable size for you, chances are they're going to be quite genetically related to each other. There might be a bit of variation. Hopefully, more and more, we are trying to get a genetically diverse population to put in the ground. But if you're getting from natural seeding that's coming in on its own, we would expect a more regionally specific genetic population to be there, and also that more of that natural variation just appearing in what's growing into your space. And it should be more naturally resilient to the kind of weather and things you get in your local area, your diseases that might be coming in. Having that idea of a natural resistance built into the genetic biodiversity is really important and an area of huge research at the moment. So hopefully something we'll be able to look into in a decade's time once we've got enough growth and populations going and we can get some geneticists into the team to really start digging into this. And maybe it'll be the same ones who are looking into what's going on in the genes happening in the soil communities too. So yeah, biodiversity on all fronts. Again, no simple answers. Nature is beautifully complex and more choices to be made, unfortunately, but we'll just try and inform those choices as best we can.
One here that's, I think you mostly covered it earlier, but it's looking at the value of landscapes kind of being multiple different things. So meadows and wetlands and uplands and stuff like that. I guess they're asking about dense woodland kind of. They're suggesting, is it not better to protect and keep our old and ancient woodland rather than planting more trees? Although I imagine those are 2 kind of separate projects.
Yeah. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, really. It's often conflated as if there's some kind of like, you can either protect the stuff that exists or you can plant more stuff. And that's often not the case. A lot of the work that really needs doing is kind of restoring these native woodlands and expanding them. And that expansion, that kind of using this thing and making it just a little bit wider or connecting it up to other areas is the stuff that creates that genetic biodiversity and keeps it viable. So being able to bring together these different areas that have that pre-existing huge value to nature is really important. So I think prioritizing areas of connectivity for where we do our planting is super important. Creating new stuff in and of itself can be really valuable too, not least because we tend to have these patches of biodiversity spread out around the country. And if you've got an area of the country that has none of it, that is an area that is deprived of that natural resource. We don't want to just be kind of reinforcing these biases about where forests and woodlands and trees are. We want to make sure that as many areas as possible have access to these benefits while still retaining the character of those landscapes. So yeah, there's a real question around this. But I mean, I'm obviously biased into really liking trees and woodlands, but my answer is do both. Create new stuff, support the stuff that already exists. Just do it with a really kind of thoughtful approach to where you want to put things and involving the people who are local to those areas and who already know about them really well.
Is there somewhere that people can reach you and find more of your research? Because there are over 30 questions still in this Q&A box.
So whizzing back through to the end of the thing, did I actually put things on here? So I put on our email address here. That is not really the best place to ask for general more information because we'll get swamped by emails. I'm sure you're all incredibly interested in this. If I go back to the other end, I might have put a web address on here. If not, leeds.ac.uk is the university website. If you put the word leaf in front of that, so it is leaf.leeds.ac.uk, that is our specific website and has lots of information about Gair Wood. My name is Robin Hayward. You can look me up on Google Scholar or just Google generally. I should pop up. There will be links through to my academic page and research. I am also on social media to greater and lesser extents where you can come and chat to me. And I'm maybe different levels of professional on different sites, but we also have the @Leeds_Leaf account as well, which is our general academic group. And there are many people who do many interesting things. So I'd recommend checking out the whole group and seeing what it is that we do here at Leeds.
Yeah, pretty much brings us exactly to time. So I'm very sorry to the questions that we didn't make it to. People are just really excited about the work that you're doing. I think we're going to wrap it up there. But I'll let you know, so we've got some more events coming up shortly in this month. We've got the World According to Citrus, which is I believe, an in-person event happening tomorrow. We have on July 8th, the Science and Satire, the Remarkable Cartoons of Richard Owen. And of course, we have our Linnean Society's Treasures Tours coming up very shortly too. If you'd like to have a look at our website or our Eventbrite page, we would love to see you there. And another massive thank you to Dr. Robin Hayward for such a fantastic talk.
Thank you for listening.